Today I'm going to try to draw this river in Borjomi, Georgia, and while this looks and is close to impossible for me, sitting by the side of this river in the middle of the forest was just what I wanted and exactly where I needed to be. If you're new here, this series is all about my process of learning to draw while traveling the world. And this is day 89 on that journey. I still have a very long way to go. The drawing will not be anything spectacular, I promise you, but that's half the fun. If you're interested in following along, watching me progress over time and across countries, subscribe to the channel. So, today is my second day in the small town of Borjomi, Georgia, and we figured we'd take a stroll back through the central park, following the river, slowly making our way to the sulfur pools, which are thermal springs established by the Romanovs in the 1800s, which is why some people call them the Tsar baths. We didn't plan to take a dip or anything, but we made it there. They were fine. Interesting to see, I guess. Not really my thing, but the way there was everything I hoped it would be. But first, let's talk about how I'm getting this thing started and what I was thinking in the moment. So, like my drawing from Brecon Beacons National Park in Wales, which some of you might recall, as it was the only other drawing that I've done like this one, at least that I can remember, I figured the best place for me to start was up in the trees. The last thing I wanted to do was focus on the water itself, because as discussed in that video, what am I even supposed to do with it? I have no idea. And while the rocks are tempting, most of them demand a lot more attention than I'm willing to give at this point. The boulder on the right would probably make for a great starting point, but because I had such good luck with the drawing from Wales, I figured I shouldn't press it. The tree is pretty straightforward. There's not any confusing geometry to contend with like there is with the boulder, and I think it just anchors things down quite well. It keeps me aware of the scale of the rest of the scene, and it's also just nice to see something come to life early on. You'll notice that it doesn't look much like a tree just yet, and that I've used these weird spotty marks to create it. Why did I do that? I don't know. I don't know much of anything, apparently. No, this just seemed the right way to go in the moment. That's the real answer, I guess. I was conscious of just how much detail I was about to contend with, especially considering these rocks on the left. So I didn't want to lock myself into any decisive lines just yet. Also, and this is probably the real answer, I see this tree as kind of like a secondary element to the scene, meaning it's pushed into the background a bit, and by using bold lines, I would be pulling it forward, putting a spotlight on it, which I would like to avoid. So one of the tricks I've picked up to create this illusion of separation, of depth, is the use of lighter, less defined marks. So the marks to create the primary, like front and center components would ideally be sharper, bolder, more detailed, etc. While the marks to create the secondary and tertiary ones would be more and more vague, light, and simple. If I were to use color, I'd have an extra dimension to manipulate, making the important stuff bold and saturated with high contrast, and the lesser stuff more washed out. You get the idea. So by keeping this tree, along with the rest of this background area, pretty loose, vague, and less decisive, I can hopefully create the illusion that it's all, well, in the background. So ever since that drawing in Wales, the one of the waterfall in the national park, which was number 74, if you want to check it out, I have been pining for another opportunity to draw in nature. I wouldn't shut up about how nice it was, how surprised I was, and ever since I've been committed to, recreating that feeling. So having been to Borjomi last summer, I knew there would be an opportunity for me to draw somewhere along this river. I originally wanted to draw one of the many small footbridges that crosses over it, but in classic fashion, I couldn't find an angle that spoke to me. However, just walking along the river was more than enough to capture my attention, so it wasn't long before I took a seat and just started recording. I chose this series of small cascading waterfalls to add some intrigue to the foreground, and as luck would have it, there was even this fisherman in the background. So I thought that was nice. I also really love the way the boulder and the tree sort of play off of one another, sort of framing the river in the middle. Everything seemed to come together perfectly. And honestly, even without all that, I was in such a good headspace thanks to just being in nature that I probably could have drawn just about anything and been happy with it. Probably. Maybe. Probably not. I don't know. Anyway, I'm glad I found a quiet and relaxing view like this one that also happened to be beautiful. And I'm sure we've talked about it, but there's something particularly peaceful about not only being in a setting like this one, but drawing it. I feel like I get to take it in at such a higher level than had I not. And I don't mean like only by creating art can someone appreciate, not that. I just mean compared to my normal self wandering through the forest, I find a lot of peace and serenity in a place like this. But by adding the drawing to my own experience, I get to sink into that even deeper. I start noticing little things that I wouldn't have. I'm not hearing my own footsteps or my huffing and puffing as I make my way up an incline or whatever. But instead, I'm sitting here, observing the scene as thoroughly as I can. And there's something special about that. I don't know what it is exactly, and if I took a few more minutes to think about it, maybe I'd have a more poetic way of explaining it, but I think you know what I mean. I'm sure that just by sitting here without the drawing, but with that intention, the intention to simply sit, to take it all in, I might have felt similarly, but I think the drawing creates this bubble around me, shielding me from all the noise, all the thoughts that want to push their way in. In this 10, 15, 20 minute sometimes exercise, not only do I get this opportunity to sit and take it in, but I also don't have to concern myself with like active meditation. I don't need to note the thoughts and feelings and brush them away, focusing on my breath. I just need to draw. And in doing so, there's this buffer and it blocks all that stuff automatically. I think Rowan mentioned it in that same waterfall video from Wales. He said something about the process being therapeutic, whether the drawing was good or not, whether you wanted to learn or not, that stuff didn't matter. The process itself has this magic to it. And maybe other than playing music, there's nothing I can think of that does the same. Whether you like these videos or not, whether you care about drawing or not, which I'd be surprised you sitting here watching this, I'd recommend giving it a try, or at least finding something that for you does the same. It's, I don't know, it's indescribable. Well, I hope you're convinced because that took too long. So as you can see, I've got to work on some of these rocks, and there are many, and they look not all that much like rocks, but we'll ignore that for now. My whole thought process, the method I'm using to make the rocks, goes something like this. I look out to a cluster of rocks and I pick out a shape. I try to roughly draw that shape, largely unconcerned with its accuracy because who actually cares? And then I take the shadow of that shape and try to do the same. Once I had a few of those, well, I realized that I wasn't making much headway and I'd need to pick up the pace if I was ever going to finish this. So then I made up a bunch of my own rock shapes with their own shadows, hoping to speed things up and, stop wasting time on the constant back and forth, up and down observation. I think that was a good move for me, and it worked out, at least to the extent that any of this worked out, because if I'm honest, this isn't looking too great, but I'm trying. So I quickly realized that I needed to focus on two things, and those were large masses of rocks and shadow. There's no world where I draw every rock here, so focusing instead on what the larger groups, or like I said, clusters look like, was important. And every rock has a shadow. So rather than get bogged down by all of this detail, I could fall into this specific physical motion, this pattern, I guess, where my hand could more easily sweep through an area like this with all these rocks. Did that work? Not really. Ultimately, it still looks like a handful of big rocks rather than the hundreds of small ones. I wanted to create a suggestion of many rocks, but that didn't happen, so I don't know. That's fine, I guess. Moving on. The big boulder in the foreground. What have I done? What's going on with this? Shape-wise, it's way too tall, but I don't really mind that. Correct proportions is cool and all, but sometimes I don't know where I'm going with this sentence, actually. The proportions are off, but I don't care because other more significant stuff is more off. And this is something I've said since the beginning, so it drives me a little crazy that I'm still saying it. But the shading on this boulder, along with the shading of practically everything else in the scene, is bad. It's not good. I've been saying my shading is lazy, but actually I think the laziness should be attributed to my off-screen time, where I could be making a concerted effort to understand how to achieve the look that I'm going for. I could be using the practically infinite resource that is the internet to research this one seriously lacking dimension of my drawing abilities, but I don't, because I want to just brute force figure it out in the moment, but that doesn't seem to be working for me. Anyway, final thoughts before the final drawing. I've drawn the fisherman guy. I think he's hilarious, perched up there like a little elf or something. He's so tiny, it's ridiculous. Whatever, it's fine. The water, as opposed to the waterfall in Wales, this water doesn't have much force, so there's not a lot to suggest here, which makes it more difficult. I think it's fine. A lot of this is turning out to be fine. It'd be a lot better if the surrounding elements worked out, which they really didn't. And then finally, there's the background mess, which is meant to represent the density of the forest, but instead it looks like I closed my eyes and scribbled down some nonsense. And that concludes that. Okay, so did I go into this with high expectations because of Wales? Yes, clearly I did. I've only mentioned it like 10 times. I actually really don't like this at all, but in the moment, I could not have cared less for all the reasons I've previously stated. I'm just so elated to be out here, and even though the drawing sucks, it does, just, it was more than worth the time that it took. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments, like the video, all that. And I appreciate you for taking the time to watch this one, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.